Welcome, everyone, to Getting Hired After 50, even though I changed the title of this shortly after when people started saying, can I come if I am under 50? Absolutely. This is in all ages. I want to introduce our guest today, my friend Kate McLagan Bond, who I met through the Colorado Commission on Aging, where she chairs the Workforce Committee. Kate has got an over 3-decade career doing leadership coaching, career transition, training employers about what they need to know about experienced talent and how to leverage the benefits of them. She currently runs a consulting firm doing that based out of Colorado. Before that, she was from Austin, Texas, and she is claiming that Austin, Texas has better margaritas. We're still going to hold true to her advice nonetheless. Kate, I am so glad that you have joined us. When people were asking me to do a coffee chat with someone like this, I know a number of people who are career coaches, but none of them seem to have your background of both providing kind of the leadership on a policy level, the leadership to employers, as well as career coaching with people in transition. So I know that you know how things work on the ground, and I also know that you've got a really good sense of what the broader trends are. So with that, I'm just going to go ahead. If everybody just wants, put yourself on mute. If you have ideas or resources, go ahead and put them in the chat. We will be sharing both the recording and the resources that are in the chat with all of you. And the other thing that we're going to do is, and people are asking for multiple, I'm not even sure what that thing that just jumped up on my screen means, but so therefore I'm declining it. So I apologize to whoever just put up some requests for multiple presenters, because as far as I know, Kate is the only presenter here, unless you brought friends. Kate, are you good? Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Kate, I would love for you to start with the big picture here. We know that looking for a job after 50, and now I'm hearing more and more from people after 40, or even in the tech field in their late 30s, can feel like a completely different game than it did earlier in our careers. What is genuinely different now, and what hasn't changed as much as maybe some of us fear?
Janine, thank you for having me as your guest on this coffee chat. This discussion, this economy, this time is really different. I've been tracking workforce trends for over 30 years, and it's just an interesting landscape. Unfortunately, in an hour, I'm going to be able to only hit surface points on many of these, so it might be a little frustrating to some people. But I think what's changed is, first of all, we have a multi-generational workplace. So it's the first time in the history of the world with at least 4 to 5 generations working together. In addition to that, technology's changed. So therefore, AI is something to deal with. Because of technology and AI, that impacts talent acquisition, the hiring process. And this sort of is like high level and then cascades down, like each thing is connected to the other. Talent acquisition is required to use, in many cases, required to use applicant tracking systems. And then social media is so prevalent. So your visibility in LinkedIn and other places is another example of what's changed. What's not changed is the basic business problems and the need for leadership and advice in the workplace today. And also what's not changed is there is a framework, which I'll show in a few minutes, of the job market, which is 85% of us roughly get our jobs in a hidden job market, and about 15% access jobs in the visible market. And so that has not changed.
So, Kate, and I want to dive a little bit deeper into that. One of our participants put it this way: a job hunt a decade back, I attended in-person networking events every week. Now I'm not finding many in-person events. So is there a good way to deal with the post-pandemic all electronic job hunt, especially for those of us who have been taught that the way we really find opportunities is through networking?
When I moved back to Denver a couple years ago, I had to start over myself as far as the network goes. I think there are events happening out there. That's how I met Janine, was attending her speech at University of Denver. It was a free activity. So there's a lot of things out there. There's meetups. There's things happening at rec centers. We held a job fair this winter at a rec center in Arvada. You could volunteer and meet people. universities, libraries. There's a place called Senior Planet that provides technology. There's just a ton of opportunities out there. You've got to be a little bit more resourceful and creative.
Okay. And we'll put some resources in the chat when we send out a follow-up email of some of the ways that you can identify places that are hosting useful networking events as opposed to non-useful. Somebody queued up this question. They're a 50-plus IT professional, over 20 years of experience, including several years in solution engineering and pre-sales. They've been on a career break for over 10 months, and they're applying for roles that align well with their experience and getting very few responses from employers. When you hear that, what's your sense of what's really going on underneath the silence, and what advice would you give? I know, big question, but
The first thing that comes to mind is, have you modernized your resume? In other words, have you changed some things, which we're going to get into in a few minutes, taken off any multiple years of decades of experience? So your resume needs to be modernized. So does your LinkedIn profile. You should reframe or frame the career break as if you were in consulting or doing some kind of special project or even caretaking. That has to be mentioned. And then you need to bypass some of the screeners if you can. Use your LinkedIn network. Try to find people that work at the places that you're looking at or applying. And then we're also going to talk about if you're applying, if you're putting all of your effort into the visible job market, that is a big ocean as opposed to a small pond. So you put yourself at a disadvantage by applying for positions that are public and advertised.
okay. And you're going to be talking more about that, I know.
Yes.
I want to go, though, to maybe one of the hardest questions that I know probably many people on this call have faced, even though people may not say this to your face, so to speak. How are 50 plus candidates, age 50 plus candidates, viewed by employers today, especially when competing with a younger workforce? We know that there are some people out there who are just saying, we want those young, fresh faces. What's the reality about how employers are thinking about this?
The reality is bias is real and it's documented. And I do hear and talk to people who experience it. On the flip side of that, I find that it's inconsistent with employers. I have several clients across the United States right now, 50s, 60s, early 70s, that are getting interviews. We did change their resume. We did work on their LinkedIn profile. So if you take off 15 plus years over the 15 years experience, if you drop graduation dates, you've got to really take some information off the resume and your LinkedIn profile. But I am seeing employers interview some older folks. So it's a mixture of both, but you've got to do whatever it takes to put your best foot forward to combat that.
So, Kate, and this next question that one of our registrants asked, I have some thoughts on as well, but I'd love to hear yours as first. We've spoken with a lot of recruiters in order to help our experienced members. So we have some organizations joining us today. And they've said people over 50 are often disregarded by recruiters because they fear the candidates are, quote, too expensive, not current, set in their ways, or will leave as soon as something more lucrative comes along. Your thoughts on how we combat that misperception? Now, that was the question from the audience. And I would say, how do we combat those really stupid prejudices? That's my opinion.
Yeah, I'm sure there are some folks, some talent acquisition people and employers that view it that way. And like I said, there is some inconsistency. The key is how you portray or demonstrate your value, your impact, your productivity. And I hope we can talk about this during our hour today. I have examples of real live clients where I've had to work on the statements. For example, if someone says, I have over 20 years of experience managing complex IT pre-sales, I'll change that to something like solutions engineer who accelerates sales velocity. So it's how we present ourselves verbally and in writing. And you can say things like, I demonstrate a growth mindset. I'm aware of the market, the realities of the market or a salary situation and so forth. What's your take? Janine, on
Well,
how
my take, and I will be sending out, I've written a number of articles about how these myths are exactly this. They're myths, they're outdated stereotypes. Talk about old school. That's all of these stereotypes are actually factually incorrect and been demonstrated in data from a number of very reputable consulting organizations. So I'll send that out. But my take is this, that somehow we need to be able to refute those ideas coming in the same way that you suggested, if somehow in LinkedIn profile and resume, we're demonstrating here are the problems that we've solved. Here is how we are using AI to solve company problems now. Here is the kind of thing showing this ongoing kind of professional development so that people don't get locked into the not willing to learn stereotypes. So I've got a couple of articles on that, but would love your thought in your client work. Is there language or actual phrases that you've coached your clients to use that kind of dismantle those four fears? And especially, I'm very curious about this too expensive, because I feel, and again, I don't interview, so I don't know, but I feel like I probably wouldn't want to walk into an interview and say, I'm willing to take less than you want to pay. But how does somebody counter the you're too expensive?
it's a more complex answer. I don't want to be glib and just give a response that sounds like you can wave your magic wand. Again, it's how you write your presentation of yourself and how you verbally describe it. And concurrently saying, I'm aware of market and salary realities. I think if people put the focus on why they're a good fit for the role and something about stability and demonstrating their capability, I think some of those kinds of things will hit home. But it's a deeper, more complex answer in my experience.
I know that you've got some examples that we'll be sharing before and
Yes.
after resumes and that kind of thing that we don't have time to go over here, but we're going to send them out along with the recording and the other handouts. And then here's a big question that continues to come up, and it's about the resume question. Lately, there's been a lot of conversation in social media. I think Fast Company wrote an article about CV Botoxing. Somebody queued up the question, do I really need to Botox my CV to get my next job? And for those who haven't heard the term, it's basically, do I shave years off my resume? What's your best advice?
So the thing that I tell all my clients right out of the chute is everything you say and everything you write is marketing. Your resume is a marketing document nowadays. In the past and historically, including myself, we write resumes and LinkedIn profiles from a historical chronological point of view. And you've got to strategize and reframe your experience tied to what it is you want to do going forward, whether it's a career change, contract work, or another full-time position. So it's a marketing document, and there is a best practice now on the resume. I've seen it on LinkedIn over and over again that it has to have a very simple format and flow for AI in particular, or even software resume screening services. But you need your basic heading at the top and a professional profile next. And then you start with your most recent work experience or profession, and how you word all that. Again, going back to word it with outcomes, build value, build productivity. We need to stay away from just a simple, I was a manager or I managed, was responsible for. And also make sure you're looking at the job description and putting keywords that are connected to the job description that you're applying for. And then you've got to do the same thing with LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a mirror. It is a current timeline of you. So recruiters and different folks are looking at LinkedIn, and it's important that it connects and directly correlates to your resume.
And so, Kate, let me ask you this. You talked about having kind of this professional summary at the top, not the old style objective, but a professional summary.
Yes.
I've heard advised that if you've got really valuable company, big name company experience or something, but it is 30 years out, that might be the place to do some kind of name throwing around of big companies that you've worked for. Do you agree with that advice?
I think It all depends. There's a context. Everything is contextual and situational. So who is this going to? Because sometimes we lean into our network and use our contacts to send a resume, or we're applying to the job directly. So you're going to have to do some research and legwork to determine if that's a good move or not. But again, I go back to significant competencies, universal business problems like operational efficiency or problem solving, program management, project management. Try to tie in that make you stand out and have experience.
Okay. This one, this was a really interesting question. So thank you, whoever asked it, because I was like, how do we get seen as energetic and able to add value through a resume, which is such a flat, static document? And I'll tell you why this really struck me. I was being interviewed by some national media publication on the work that I do about talking about the value of experienced talent. And the person said, "Oh, you're so energetic." And I was like, what on earth does that mean? Like, how did you ever get the idea that perhaps I wasn't? So how does one convey energy if you're not, before you're getting to an in-person conversation?
In defense of introverted folks like myself, I mean, I can be very energetic and passionate about, especially career transition and job search. The word energetic is subjective, so it just depends on who's your audience. I think you can project wisdom, experience, knowledge, some core competencies that are tied to what you're looking for. And in addition to potential resume, I'd like for people to consider a bio. A bio can be much more personable and interesting to send to somebody. And I have templates for that. And I've had several of my 40-somethings use the bio recently as opposed to that resume and got better response.
And again, this probably works best when you're doing kind of a networking strategy as opposed to when you're throwing a resume or application over the transom. We had a number of questions about AI, ATS, and getting in front of a human. I know you and I had a whole separate conversation, and I will send out that recording as well. But let me ask you a few questions here. And I'm noting that Catherine says she should have submitted this question in advance. But we know that Stanford did publish a study that was showing both age and racial bias in the automatic tracking systems. And that if you got rejected once through one of these, you're likely to get rejected for everything, right? Outside of the legal strategies, there's some significant lawsuits going on now against automatic tracking systems. What can people do? How do people get their resumes past automated rejection and in front of a hiring manager? Your best advice. And I'm going to narrow it specifically on age right here, because I think racial bias is a whole other thing, important, but probably something that we could do a whole other segment on. How's that for a complicated question, my friend?
I'll zero right into the AI applicant tracking system. And I have quite a few clients in Texas at the University of Texas, MBA students, who also don't do their resume correctly for the ATS. So they have these great careers and professional capabilities, and yet their resume has some very negative don'ts in it. So do some research on AI and on ATS in particular, and look up what are the do's and don'ts. I don't want to spend the time going on that, but I'm happy to send a summary to everyone if that would be helpful. So you need to do the do's and don'ts. You've got to reformat your resume to make it, including some LinkedIn information. Use AI to write a cover letter. Use AI to modify your resume to match the keywords in the job description. In addition to sending the resume, remember I said if you compete in the visible job market, you are still at a great disadvantage. However, you can still proceed and apply. But I would try to go to the network like LinkedIn, to the company, to some of your contacts, and lean into your network in addition to writing it appropriate for ATS.
And we do have an hour-long session that we did specifically about getting through automated tracking system. And that's got like the step-by-step. And I think one of the things that I know I learned out of that was don't make your resume pretty. And a lot of people have these very glitzy, very beautifully formatted, and that actually is a disadvantage to the ATS. Networking. A lot of questions came in about networking, including someone who maybe, like you, describes himself as an introvert, networking is the hardest part for me. So far, the people I have networked with have not led me to find hidden jobs. People have told me they know the market is tough and they're not hiring. What should I say?
Let me say just a sage piece of advice first. Don't make up a story about what you read or what other people say, or even manufacture some kind of myth in your mind about what's happening out there. Do the work yourself. Do the footwork, do the legwork yourself. Networking is critical. And when I say networking, there's tons of opportunities to meet people. It's how you frame what you need and the conversation with people. So when I first got to Denver 2 years ago, I would try to go to events and things and meet people, ask them to coffee or lunch. And I'd ask every single person, is there someone, one or two people you think I should see, meet, or talk to? And almost every person gave me a name. Some of them made a mutual introduction for me. So you're going to look for two things, which I'll talk about in just a minute, but I want to share this picture, this image first, real quick. This is an image that I created. I've been tracking job search, the job market for 30 years. And these statistics are percentages are approximate. They do vacillate a little bit depending on the economy and the industry and the skill set that's needed. But essentially, 15% of us at the top of this iceberg find our jobs in the visible job market. So you can see that if you look and job search that way, it puts you in a reactive mode. And the ROI of this for most of my clients is about 1%, which is pretty terrible. Whereas 85% of us get our jobs in the hidden job market. And that's through information interviews, all kinds of different activities, volunteering, and the networking piece. If you put more of your time and energy and focus on this 85%, your ROI, you're in a proactive mood and your ROI is much higher. So think of everything you do each week, your calendar and your time spent, as low impact versus high impact use of your time. If the majority of your time during the week is focused and geared on that 15%, then that's the ROI, that's the result that you'll get. If you put a lot more focus on this 85%, the ROI, the high impact use of your time will be much greater. So the initial speech I want to give about networking, we can keep going if you
Okay, so I've got a very specific, what does an effective networking conversation look like? So for example, I'm not even going to tell you how many requests per week via LinkedIn message. Can we have a conversation? And then I say, well, about what? Or can I do an informational interview? And people are like, well, I don't know. I just wanted to pick your brain. That is not. And so I just say no. And yet I remember when you came to Denver and you reached out, and probably because 10 different people told me, you need to talk with Kate McLagan. You and I ended up chatting, but it was something specific that you were, what should people be doing if they're looking at their network and they're mapping people out? What does a good conversation look like? How do you ask for a conversation and in a way that will make someone say yes?
This question is gold and my answer is gold. Like, this is so critical and important. First of all, you're looking for two things. You're trying to figure out your labor market. What are the business trends wherever you are in your geographic location? And what are the drivers of change? For example, renewable energy is a hot hiring demand area, and everyone knows healthcare is too. So you got to do some research on maybe that particular industry if you're interested in it, but ask people what they know about the business trends and the drivers of change. Secondly, the questions that you ask, the net worth of your questions yields the net worth of the meeting. So you've got to have a really good 1-minute commercial about yourself, and that's that high impact. What's the value that you bring? The way I describe it is, what are your core talents? So the intro, there's like an intro, body, and conclusion. You've got to have a good commercial on yourself and some good questions. And last, I would say listen 70% and only talk 30%. So again, if you're asking good questions and you introduce yourself in a brief, succinct, impactful way, I think the conversation will go well. And the last thing is make sure you ask for other introductions or people that you should talk to.
So what I heard you say is at the end, ask for introductions, but you're not saying something like, do you know anybody who would hire me?
Correct.
That
Yeah, that's one of the areas I have to really pull in the reins on clients is they want to ask, do you know of any jobs or
yeah.
who's hiring? And it scares people away and they shut the window or door in your face.
Yeah. Okay. Good advice. One participant asked, and this was interesting because you've talked about LinkedIn a lot, and I know a lot of people are here because perhaps they follow me on LinkedIn. One person said, how to market myself not on LinkedIn. And so I want to add to that question. Can you afford to not be on LinkedIn these days if you're job hunting? And what are alternatives if there is some reason why you absolutely cannot be on LinkedIn?
I know some people who have negative attitudes about it, and they're younger, by the way. They're in their early 40s, late 30s. Not sure why, but if you're, and these two folks I'm thinking of are looking for work, if you're looking for work, I think you shoot yourself in the foot if you don't have some kind of presence on LinkedIn, because talent acquisition folks do check LinkedIn, and they also check to see if what you say matches your resume. So how do you stand out if you're not on LinkedIn, you're not networking, or the LinkedIn piece in particular? I've seen people write a bio and submit it to friends and say, here's kind of what I'm looking for. I've seen people create business cards with their top 2 to 3 talents and go to different events and hand them out. If you hear of anything or meet anyone, send it my way. I've seen people volunteer. I've seen them go to meetups. I've seen them just get involved in the community, show up. And there's a lot of different things in Colorado in particular. I'm sure there are other states as well that need advice, consulting. As older adults, we have incredible wisdom and insight and experience in some areas, and we need to tap into some of that. So show up at things and volunteer and be seen.
Okay, let me follow up on that. One of the things that I advise my clients who want to take their experience, expertise, insight, connections into a consulting path, I advise them to write articles, demonstrate their thought leadership, show up speaking. Is that useful for job hunting? I know that's a really good way to get consulting clients. Is that useful for job hunting?
It can be. You just have to be very strategic about it, and you've got to know exactly what you're going to be consulting around. So, for example, 15 years ago, I left corporate America and started my own consulting firm. And I went to several different professionals as I was still living in Austin at the time and asked for their advice. You or me, what would you do? That type of thing. And I got some really good pieces of advice. But what I ended up focusing on was multiple streams of income, because it's difficult to just get one, unless it's really needed and missing. It's difficult to get one type of form of income or consulting gig. So it's going to take a lot of legwork, basically.
Yeah. Well, I love consulting. I knew that at an early age. We have a marketing consultant in the room who said what they really need to network better. So, leading to what we were just talking about for new consulting opportunities, in your view, does networking for consulting and contract work look differently than networking for a full-time job? I would say no, but I've never networked for a full-time job. What do you think?
Yeah, I did it 15 years ago and I met with different people. I did end up doing a business card with my top talents and gifts. And then I also did a bio. I know somebody was interested in weaving in their life experience with their work experience for some contract or consulting work. So I had 5 years overseas in Southeast Asia, and I wove in that expertise and travel and understanding of the culture into one of my bios and got a really nice consulting gig with a organization that has a large Asian presence. So it's about strategizing and who you talk to.
Somebody straight out asked, where are the best places to apply? I would slightly modify that question. What kind of industries are you seeing? Where are people hiring right now? I know you mentioned earlier energy, healthcare. Anything else, specific industries that are hiring?
Yeah, I noticed someone's asked about the best job hunters or tools and platforms. So I did a little research on this. My MBAs in Austin are up on all this, of course. There's something called Teal, like the color, and Hunt, HUNTR. Those are the top two career management sort of services. JobScan compares your resume to the job opening. Did They Ghost You is another site where you can check if a job opening is a ghost listing or report it. And then there's another one called hunter.io that you can actually source and find emails of people in the company that you have applied to. So I thought that was pretty cool. I'm always learning and trying to stay up on technology and tools. But the hottest fields right now are financial services, healthcare, manufacturing, defense, and renewable energy. And by the way, I have a veteran in Texas who I said, well, if your background's defense, it's the Army, what's happening in the defense industry? There's a drone company in Austin that is making drones to prevent school shootings. That's a sad statement, but whatever it takes. And their first pilot is here in Denver, Colorado, starting in a month or so. So that kind of blew my mind. So you just have to figure out what's driving change and research it.
And research it. And again, I think that speaks to the value of having networking conversations like you were having, of reaching out and not just thinking you can find it on your own by asking ChatGPT. Siva's also put something in the chat about ghost applicants. There's a particular site that calls out companies that are doing ghost applicants, and somebody else has put a link to a volunteer job board. And Kate, we'll get those links from you that you just mentioned and we'll send them out, right?
Okay.
Along with the recording. Terrific. All right, let's keep going. We've still got tons of questions and only 25 minutes. A question a lot of people queued up some variation of: is career adjusting, changing, transition possible at this life stage and in this job market? I know that's something that when I've been part of the Encore movement for a long time, we've always talked about now is our time and we're going to do what we really want. Is that possible?
Well, I'm testimony at an age that's probably older than a lot of people on the call here. I reinvented myself over and over again. The way that I do it is go talk to people, find out what's happening, who do they know, what are the competencies required, and then market myself accordingly. Think of yourself as a marketing campaign and you have a verbal presentation and a written presentation. So there are two concurrent roads kind of in front of you that you have to manage. And then, of course, the social media presence. So how you manage the content for each of those is probably an ever ongoing, ever changing challenge.
And so it sounds like that is true whether you were looking for full-time work or part-time work. I know some people queued up questions about how to find part-time work that is maybe different than something you've been doing. But my take of what you've said, Kate, is the process is still pretty much the same, right? You're finding what are the problems that you can solve.
Yes.
Researching what the world around you is doing and finding the convergence of that, and then turning it into a compelling, both written and oral statement. Is that fair?
Yes. And I will say that the trend, there's a lot of research I did recently, plus I've personally experienced this recently. I went through a program this winter, kind of an Encore career program, and all of the folks in my class and all of the research I'm seeing and reading is older adults, particularly 60 and older, want part-time work. Very few want full-time. I'm not minimizing or discounting the folks that want full-time, but we want part-time. And the other thing we want, along with the other generations, is flexibility. Employers have really lost sight of giving us flexibility because so many of us, even millennials, are caretaking older parents. Everything is different right now due to this multi-generational landscape.
What do you recommend for countering internalized ageism? The voice in our own head before any employer says a word that maybe says, am I too old to actually go for that? Or are they going to take me seriously? I know from my work in ageism that people tend to absorb the messages around us, expiration date on your forehead. How do you recommend that people deal with that? And if you have a client coming to you that is being I don't know, I'm too old, how do you counsel them?
Well, I will admit, sometimes when I look in the mirror, I have to also have some self-talk. And then the self-talk is, which I try to pass on to others, especially some of my older clients, is take stock of what you have done, kind of high level that you're really good at. The format that I use is called CAR, C-A-R. What are some of the challenges and problems you've solved? The A part is the actions, the action verbs. What did you do to attack it and resolve it? And the result is the R part. So think back on your experience and write some CAR statements, some accomplishment statements, which, by the way, is how you answer interview questions. And it also should be how you write your result statements in your resume. So take stock, take inventory of your background, and I think you'll feel a lot more positive and excited about what you have to offer.
Yeah. And that just sounds like great advice for in any kind of job hunting, but as well as dealing that's definitely a two-for strategy. It can help you remember how great you are as
Yes.
well as be great interview prep. I'm looking at this question in the chat and I'm curious on your take. Michael is asking, laid off in January, set up Social Security benefits, however, may have a full-time job interview coming up that is in his field, pays well. He started doing part-time and freelance after the layoff, but curious how he should approach the full-time interview should it arise. Do you have thoughts on that?
Well, I'm not sure exactly what he's asking. Is he concerned it's going to impact his Social Security? Or
Michael, maybe you can throw some, yes, he's concerned it would affect Social Security.
well, it affects it depending on the age. Since I'm past the age of being able to collect it fully, you can work full time if you're 66 in 2 months. I think it is, unless they increased it to 67. But you can work full time if you're past that qualification. It's
Right.
just, it's taxable income. So do you want to pay that?
How do you name what you see, the blind spots, the repeated mistakes, in a way that lands as valuable as opposed to stereotype about older person resisting new ideas? Thoughts?
Yeah, I come from a place of best practice. So
Of course you do.
if they ask for feedback, I usually wait for the invitation to give it. But if they're asking for feedback on a resume or whatever it is, I will say that my job is not to be critical or judge. My job is to help you sell yourself and put your best foot forward. So I come from a place of best practice because I teach companies how to write job descriptions. I teach organizations how to interview. I teach the other side of the desk, the candidates, how to interview. I think I have a pretty good grasp on what's a best practice. I will present a best practice, like, for example, resume. And instead of me saying resume is terrible or it lacks this or that, I will send a before and an after sample so they can see the difference for themselves. And I also will say that the best practice is the final or the after example is what most recruiters and corporations or businesses are looking for today.
Okay. Another big question that really comes up out of stereotyping that is done as we get older about us is that we don't stay relevant. And I literally have heard a particular friend of mine who had been a CMO, chief marketing officer for a Fortune 500 company, and that experienced challenges during COVID. So she was up for a digital marketing job. And she was told that they were going to go with someone younger because they thought that they would be better at digital marketing and that she probably hadn't stayed relevant. Now, of course, to me, if they had checked her social media, they would have seen what a total rock star she was, but they didn't do that. How does one proactively not only stay relevant, but demonstrate kind of resume, LinkedIn, networking, that you are staying relevant as opposed to just saying, I'm still relevant? How do you show it? How do you show
Yeah, that's a great question. It reminds me of one of my mottos, which is demonstrate, don't declare. And so, what are your avenues for demonstration? One of them is LinkedIn. Have a presence on LinkedIn. If you have some expertise or intellectual statement, contribution, knowledge capital, make a contribution on LinkedIn about a particular area. There's several different subject areas I'm interested in, and I try to stay on top of it on LinkedIn just to have a voice and sort of educate and inform. Again, if you're out in the community, I've gotten involved in Colorado in the last 2 years, and I try to have a demonstration as opposed to a declaration. But when you can, insert yourself and describe it in such a way, like I said, the car, where it is a, how did you do that? What does that look like? As opposed to declaring it and saying that you do. And you really do need to experiment with AI. I experiment all the time. I'm learning something new almost every day.
Yeah.
And of course, it's how you ask, how you use AI, the prompt, which you have helped me remind me of all the time.
I love my prompts. Yeah, they're
Makes
so
a
fun
difference.
to create. So one participant raised really a bigger issue, and I think it's important. We know that there are people who are kind of getting by. There are people who want a job, but will still be okay if they're not hired, have savings or whatever. But we also know that the fastest growing group of people in poverty in the United States are people age 65 and over. The fastest growing group of homelessness are people age 55. Some of the most heartbreaking questions or outreach that I get on LinkedIn are from people who are like, I'm desperate, I'm about to be homeless, and people who are still hoping that they're going to get a job, quote, in their field. What's your recommendation if someone is, kind of on the margins? How do you change a job seeking strategy? Do you go to the Home Depot and say, I'm here? What do you do?
Well, I have one example. First of all, my heart goes out in huge empathy for folks that are in that situation. Unfortunately, Colorado is one of the most expensive states in the US. So, yeah, it's a problem for a lot of us that are older and we are trying to hang on to any savings. An older adult near me in my neighborhood, early 70s, did not want to go back to the fast track management position she had, was too stressful, but she does need income. She's living on Social Security alone. She does have some very small nest egg. We sat down and brainstormed, and she decided to do multiple streams of income. So she's an Uber driver. She's doing some pet care for some people around here that know her and trust her. She makes really good money doing the pet sitting, by the way. And she's doing some kind of what I call a white glove service, where if you're gone for a month, she'll go in and check your home. So people are being pretty entrepreneurial about getting sources of income. And I'm sure in some cases it's some cash or, some ways to have it readily available. So you got to be creative and talk to people and get some ideas. But I do see people having multiple gigs, including taking boarders, into their homes.
Yeah. And I want info on that pet sitter. My pet sitter just decided to go off to college. How dare he? So right as we're about to go on a trip. So I want to talk about ghost jobs for a minute, because we know, and I hear from people all the time, of they thought they were pursuing a good lead and it turned out to be a ghost job. I've actually had like fake recruiters reach out to me saying, you're exactly what we want. And I'm like, I have not worked a job since I was 16. So no, I don't want to start now. How do you tell a real listing from a ghost job before you invest hours in it? And we are going to include a link to that new platform, ghostiu.com, where people can report being ghosted, which was shared by one of our participants. But how can you tell not only ghost job, but these fake recruiters that seem rampant on LinkedIn, who always have the perfect opportunity that you are the perfect candidate for?
Well, remember, if you're putting yourself in that visible 15%, you are subjecting yourself to fill in the blank. So I'm going to repeat, a higher impact use of your time would be to try to shortcut or, find contacts. But I would report it to LinkedIn. You can report it to Indeed, check with the employer, try to find an opening to the company itself. Sometimes the job listing says open until filled. You can even Google it. You can go on AI and learn about this ghosting. I do want to caution people to be careful. I've heard a couple stories from folks on LinkedIn that I know and trust who said they had a bot, an AI bot, do the initial screening on their computer, and it was a scam, and the bot took control of their computer, and it wasn't actually a job interview. So I'm just saying that for people to be careful. I personally don't see that many ghost listings, so I'm not sure how prevalent this is, but I did have a client in California send me an email from somebody, and I said, that's very suspicious to me for several reasons. So check it out, and report it where you can.
And Edward is suggesting that if they want to connect with you on WhatsApp or Signal, beware. So
Yeah,
tip for
I'm
everybody willing.
experiencing that. Yeah. And I
Oh,
get random texts on my Gmail or whatever. Do you want some remote part-time work? And I just delete it. There's a lot of scams out there.
there's so many scams, which is especially heartbreaking when people really need to work. And Nancy is raising the issue, and I've heard this from people before. It can be difficult to network when a lot of your contacts have, quote, retired. And I know that has happened to many of us. We're, quote, still in the workforce, and people who are kind of our peers and contemporaries have stepped away. Any recommendations for how you kind of start networking when the people who were kind of your peers are no longer in the workforce?
I would, like I did when I came to Denver, I would look for events that either you can afford to pay a little something for or are free, and try to talk to people and ask them questions. How are you involved in Denver? Again, I go back to your questions are key. They yield the net worth of your investigation. So ask people, what do they know? Who do they know? What's happening? What other events? Google it. You can go to visit Denver, like your city, .com, and there's tons of stuff. Show up, meet people, and explore, investigate.
No one asked this question, but I've got this question because I've heard people have told me this. Okay, Janine, that's all well and good that someone like Kate, who's an expert, says shave years off your resume or your LinkedIn profile. But what happens when I show up at the interview and they can tell I've got a few wrinkles? Thoughts on that, on how you command in the interview when you know walking into the room, even if you are walking into a virtual room, that people are likely to be younger and maybe a little bit skeptical.
Again, it's how you present yourself, the value, the impact that you provide, the productivity. Try to know what those real world problems are, whether it's efficiency, building alliances, like know what your background is and write it in such a way where you're showing impact.
That's okay, because
Yeah.
another question, and it's kind of related, how do you balance, especially as someone who's got a lot of experience of, I know I can solve your problems. Here are the problems. I've researched it. I know what the problems are in your industry. I know how to solve them without seeming like that older know-it-all.
Well, I think you do your research on who you're going to talk to and what it is. Again, it's contextual and situational. And then you present the information that is imperative for success in that conversation. So it's strategic. Again, it's marketing and it's some emotional intelligence. Who are you talking to and what is it that you want to accomplish, and focus on that.
Okay. Paula Getz, hi, friend. Haven't seen you in a while. We need to get together. Paula is asking, do we know anyone who is working on the business case for older workers and intergenerational teams? And I will say, I mean, that is something that I have been doing, as you know, Paula, for some time. And employers are generally receptive. And having said that, part of the whole conversation about age inclusion somehow got wrapped up in this country in the anti-DEI movement, which is ironic to those of us who've been working on it since age was never considered part of DEI, but here we are. I think that there are people and organizations that continue to do it, but employer by employer is hard. And that's why one of the things that I've been working on with a group of people around the country is to also on the policy level, and we're calling it put age bias on the ballot, to make sure that Congress, people running for office, understand that workplace age discrimination is real. and that we want and expect them to do something about it. But I'll send out information about that for anyone who's interested. I think at this point, it's probably a better, more immediate solution than employer by employer because of the context that we're in.
Can I add to that, Janine, real
You go.
quick? My workforce committee, I'm a commissioner on the Commission of Aging, and I chair the workforce committee. And one of the initiatives I want us to work on in the next year is talking to employers. Employers need to rethink this multi-generational, intergenerational workplace, from hiring, attraction, retention of folks, and mentoring. How can we help young people? So we've got to get in front of employers.
And if there's anyone who, I am always happy to train people on the presentation and that kind of thing. So we may schedule something like that if for people who are willing to go out in their own communities. And when we started doing it, we literally just started delivering presentations to chambers of commerce where we could get in front of a number of employers at the same time. Nancy is asking, and then I'm going to have one final question for you, Kate. Nancy is asking, what can you do about graduation dates on CVs? In Colorado, we passed the Job Application Fairness Act, which prohibits employers from asking for age or graduation dates on initial job applications. We would like to see legislation like that passed around the country. Connecticut, a few other states have very similar legislation. Certainly don't put them on a CV if you don't have to, but it's hard to get past those online applications. So right now, it's a thing that, in my view, requires a legislative solution. Here's my final question for you. I hope it's not too big a question. But if somebody watching this has been searching for months and is running low on hope, what's the one thing you want them to think about and, more importantly, do this week? And I think that's important. My belief is to be truly radical is to make hope possible instead of despair convincing. That's why we do coffee chats like that. That's why I'm so grateful to people like you who are willing to share your professional expertise with others. What should people do this week?
Yeah. And again, thank you for the platform to do this. It's awesome. And hopefully people get a shot in the arm. First of all, stay digitally fluent. So figure out AI, use LinkedIn. If you're going to use LinkedIn and create a bio or something, make sure that you are reframing your experience with measurable impact. Happy to help. I'll give some examples. I'll send a document with some examples on how to do that. Consider alternative career paths. And also don't self-eliminate over a skills gap. I'm hearing older adults go, well, I don't qualify for that, or I don't have that. You have the problem solving, leadership, all sorts of universal business needs and experience. The technical piece you can be taught. So present what is special and golden about you. Don't just pass it off and dismiss it because of your age.
Yeah. Kate, thank you very much. Here's what I tell employers and what I truly believe. All employers, no matter where they are, no matter what industry, need experienced talent right now more than ever.
Yeah.
We're in a time, we all know this, a time of rapid change. We've got AI accelerating. Who better to understand the context in which AI questions can be asked, how AI can be used, how to interpret results, and that kind of thing. Who better, especially when younger people are struggling to enter the workforce, to be there as mentors and to guide people the way? So we have value. We need to remember it, even when times are hard. Kate, thank you. Can everybody unmute yourself for a minute and just applaud for Kate?
Thank you, Janine.
Thank you, Kate. And we will be sending, it will probably be Friday. I'll be sending a copy of the recording, a lot of the resources that Kate mentioned, resources in the chat. Thank you all so much.
Yeah. Thank you.